were and dementing people into adopting absurd economic policies to impoverish their people. And so what's been the consequence of that since the 1980s? And the answer is that as these great economies, China and India included, but also with Africa increasingly, have adapted themselves to free market policies and rule of law and respect for the integrity and dignity of the individual, what's happened is that we've seen an unprecedented expansion of general wealth all around the world, and we've lifted more people out of poverty merely in the last 12 years than had been lifted out of poverty in the entire history of humankind before that at any given moment. And that's all a consequence. And then we could say, as to elaborate on your point, is that you look at China. So China was and is a communist country. But the reason that China has leapt forward and is now becoming twice as rich, by the way, in terms of purchasing power parity, every 7 years, twice as rich, is because they set up special economic zones that were basically predicated on the Hong Kong model, where they could leave the free enterprise types alone within the broader confines of the ethically appropriate communism. And those places took off like mad, which meant that as soon as you got the madmen and the resentful sons of bitches out of the way, that the essential conscientious striving and native intelligence of the Chinese population was able to manifest itself and turn that country from an impoverished and starving country in many ways into one of the world's industrial powerhouses. And that only took a couple of decades. And so I've always thought, when I hear the Marxist types claim that, real Marxism has never been tried, that they think narcissistically something along the following lines, which is, well, Stalin didn't do a very good job, and Lenin didn't do a very good job, and neither did Mao, and neither did Pol Pot. And those are quite a few different cultures and situations, boys and girls. But if I would have been the tyrant in charge then, with all my wisdom and my deep knowledge of Marxist doctrine, then the socialist utopia certainly would have come to fruition. And so there's a Luciferian narcissism driving this activism that's almost, it's certainly ungodly in its magnitude, and it pretty much goes all the way to the bottom. And even if that's not true of the individual holders of these Luciferian vengeful ideas, it's definitely true of the pretensions of the system of ideas itself.
I think the China example is very important, and we have a rough analog here in the United States. So the question is, you've laid it out. I think everyone knows this. Even in the 1950s and 1960s, the sophisticated and honest Marxist intellectuals in the West, for example, Herbert Marcuse in his book on Soviet Marxism, they admitted this. They said that this system does not work. It can't solve the production problem. It's devolved into bureaucratic tyranny and repression. Then you have Solzhenitsyn. Everyone knows this. Then you have the fall of communism, where it was kind of the definitive and kind of explosion of this system. So the question then becomes, if everyone knows that this is how it works, everyone can observe it, everyone who's smart knows this already, why are they still promoting it? And I think the reason is not because of some genuine conviction that, well, if only Trotsky had gained power, it would have worked out better. If only we can try it again, it'd work out great this time. I don't think they believe that, and I actually don't think that deeply in their kind of heart of hearts, they actually want to have a socialist or a communist economy, because that would require them managing and running physical production, which for intellectuals is like, oh my gosh, get me out of a factory. I can't change a tire, just forget it. And so what the actual kind of Gramscian adaptation is in a post-Soviet historical period is we don't really want to, take over the die-cut tool factory in rural Michigan to create auto parts. We're not interested in that. We want to redistribute prestige and social status. And so it's a real cynical game where they speak the language of Marxism, they speak the language of empowering the working class, they speak the language of material redistribution, but when it comes down to it, they don't really care. They know it wouldn't really work. And I think secretly, they hope that it doesn't happen because they benefit from this incredible economic production. Because again, they have those high status positions, they're entrenched in their economic fortunes, they have economic security through the bureaucracy, through the tenure system, etc. So they're cynically pushing this narrative as a way to redistribute status and prestige, which is really what they crave. That's the real currency. That's the real redistribution.
Well, everyone craves that. Everyone craves that, Christopher, I would say, because there isn't anything that you have that's more valuable than your reputation. You trade on your reputation. And if you're known by people as an honest and reciprocal player whose word is his bond and who will do what he says he will do, then everyone lines up to play with you and your economic viability is guaranteed. And so what we're tempted by constantly we're tempted by the strategy of accruing to ourselves false reputation. And it is a form of narcissism and Machiavellianism and psychopathy, because what it means is that people who have stored up genuine value in their reputation and who have been honest players and who know how to work and know how to share are much more likely to be rewarded with a deserved prestige. But the narcissists and the psychopaths and the intellectual Machiavellians can parasitize that by making unwarranted moral claims and then saying about themselves that they are as good or better than the people they're criticizing. And because they have intellectual prowess, they're often able to out-argue the people who have accrued genuine moral virtue. That might be like the self-made working class types who know what's right and who act out what's right, but who aren't as able to articulate it, which is a challenge on the conservative side. So let's, if you don't mind, let's turn to a minute, well, in our remaining time for a minute, to what you've been doing more practically. And so a lot of this discussion has in fact been intellectual, and so let's nail it back down to the ground. You've been working on the policy front in a variety of different states, most notably Florida, and to push back practically against the inroads of the system of ideas that we've been discussing. And so tell me how that's come about, what it is, and what you think the advantages and pitfalls are.
Sure. Well, I think first of all, as I said at the outset, what we have to understand is that if you want to take the metaphor of production, there's kind of intellectual production right now that is now being dominated by a specific ideology, and then using the transmission belt of the institutions in order to corrupt them, in order to achieve dominance over them. That was their strategy that they laid out in the early 1990s in critical race theory and queer theory, for example. I think the two most prominent theories that we're grappling with today. And they've achieved this. And I think that there's a need and a genuine necessity for people to understand the theories at an intellectual or abstract level. A lot of the power, just as you've said, of these ideas is because they're intimidating for people who don't have a background in academia, a background in